which moves us into storytelling. Again, as I mentioned, my presentations coach that I've been through training with, she's a master storyteller. And I've been doing this technique for years. I said over 15 years ago, I probably said I made a shift in my career from when I really started becoming more senior in the organization. I shifted from story creating, like making up stories in my head. We talked about this when we talked about fear, when you start saying, oh, I bet the reason he didn't call was this. To storytelling, which is just living in the present moment, allowing events to happen, and then crafting the story from them, taking the lesson learned from that. So storytelling links with networking really well. Storytelling gets the networking ball rolling. I pretty much can't think of a networking time that I'm not at a networking event that I'm not actually telling stories. It just makes me much more comfortable than discussing current events or what it said in the newspaper that day. I think it's really an easier technique for me. And here's how I go through it. I make sure that I go through, like, I update this every once in a while, but the first thing to do is to brainstorm 30 events in your life that taught you something, that reveal something interesting, or that are unique achievements that you had. So take a focused time, sit down with a pen and paper, and just start. And they don't have to be all have to be work events. They can be, the time my son and I got stuck out in the ocean with an undercurrent, right? And that was a really meaningful thing for me. And I now have a little business story, and I use it as an analogy. But write it down. You might end up not using it, but just brainstorm. First brainstorm at least 30 things, events that are meaningful for you, and go through them. Then what you do is you start to craft well-designed stories around them and practice them. You figure out how to embellish, dare I say. You have to create the scene too. One of my favorite things with storytelling is to set the scene for where you are, the time and place. So I'll have stories that start, it's Boxing Day and I'm at London Heathrow Airport. Boom, all of a sudden everyone's like, okay, I can picture it. And I can imagine the day after Christmas, I can imagine how crowded London Heathrow Airport was. So set the scene, practice your stories, craft them well. I have like 50 techniques for how to craft them. So maybe we'll talk about that at another time. But you get the idea, right? Craft your stories, build them, and then you figure out how to use them when you need them. In panels, even in job interviews, right? In job interviews, make sure they're bringing across your strengths, your lessons learned. What did you learn from a particular role or insight? I had someone ask me in an interview one time, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and he said, what do you do when the senior leadership team is passively resisting, right? So I could have answered the question. Instead, I said, let me tell you a story about when that happened. And boom, I had it ready to go because I had it on one of my 30 and I had already crafted a story around it because I knew that that was something that senior people encounter. I knew when I had done that in the past and how effective it was and how painful and challenging it was. And that's what the format is for stories. The basic format for stories is called Take Them Into the Valley. You start from the top of the summit that you're at, you take them down into the valley, and you bring them back out again, right, to the other side of the mountain. Keeping in mind, I'll tell you more about that in a second, but keeping in mind that what the storyteller wants is actually the journey. What the storyteller doesn't need is just the destination. They're not sitting there saying, right? They're not sitting there saying, where are you going? How many people pick up a good book and it's a thriller and you're on page 100? How many people flip to the last page of the book to find out what happens? Other than my 12-year-old son, nobody. Everybody wants the journey. Everybody wants to be taken down into the valley and back out. They want to know where they're going. They want the anticipation. And I skipped over this bullet point, but it's science, actually. I love to talk about the brain and how it impacts everything that we do at work. Our brain actually loves stories. And that's why it's such an effective technique. It loves the excitement. It loves the anticipation. It loves figuring things out and wondering what's coming next. That's why stories are so powerful. You're designed for stories to work for you. They're designed for them to be valuable, to be lessons learned, for people to be able to engage and understand what you're talking about when you tell a story. So what's the simple structure for storytelling? I'm not usually big for, I think it's pretty easy to remember this, but I'm not usually big for these tricky little 6 S's. But this time it worked really well. So we'll use it. Imagine you're engaged with someone, right? I love this little picture here. You're engaged at a cocktail party. What's the first thing you need to do? You need to first be able to segue to your topic. So you can have all your own ways for doing that, right? But you need to be able to get the mic, if you will. The second thing you need to do is signal you have something to say in a way that keeps the attention. Now, this is particularly, I noticed this in America in particular. I'm not trying to be culturally insensitive, but particularly in America, people crosstalk a lot. Right, so they're less, and it's a technique. It's just a cultural thing where everybody likes to jump in at the same time and build. It's really hard to be able to get a story out from start to finish. I find in Europe and Asia, it's much easier to do. So one of the things you need to do is you need to signal that you have something to say. You say, segueing, and it reminds me, I have a story I have got to tell you about the craziest thing that happened, right? And then all of a sudden, now you've got the mic, you've got the attention. You better have a pretty good story, well crafted and ready to go. You start with the summit as to that you were on. You start with where the story begins, right? So, as the example I used earlier, it's Boxing Day. I'm at London Heathrow Airport. I'm feeling amazing because I've just pulled off the craziest December, right? So now I've got their attention and I'm on a high note. I feel amazing. But then you go through the struggle. So then you say, I'm passing through it is a zoo and I'm passing through the security machine and they end up making me stop for a second. And as I do stop in the metal detector, I start to realize I'm feeling a bit unwell. My throat is a little sore. My head might be a bit feverish. And I realize I'm not as great as I thought I was 5 seconds ago, right? So now here's my struggle. I've created a struggle. What's the solution to the problem, right? So then I say, I come through and I realize I did it again. Every December, I do the same thing. I run on adrenaline, making it through Christmas parties, making it to year end, making sure I go to the nativity play and play Santa Claus. And it absolutely wears me out. And every single year, this happens to me. But then I figured out how never to let that happen again. And then I share with them my amazing, significant impact that it had. That wasn't the best story to choose. Apologies, but I forgot the one I was actually going to share. So, and then you share the significant impact that it had, right? So I decided in that very moment that I was never going to do that again, and I completely transformed my life, and here's how. So that's an example of storytelling. Hopefully you found that a bit more engaging than me just talking in general about saying, oh, how I found mindfulness and how I found meditation was because, I just realized that I was burnt out and tired.